And then push it forward, comb it back, push it forward, and then find your natural part. Make sure you ask the client if that is the right part. And then you're going to section down the middle of the back. Very neat, very clean. Make sure you're in the middle, and then take a small section at the bottom. Make sure you make a square line. If your line on the bottom is square, which is what you're doing with the bob. And then you're going to use your comb to cut, and starting in the middle, you're going to do your middle section and then do your two sides. Make sure your comb is in the same place on both sides and level to your line. And then check for balance on both sides. And then keep moving up the head. Now, depending on the thickness of hair, you're going to take smaller sections or thicker sections. Just make sure that you can see your guide underneath. And you're going to continue cutting with your comb and your scissors underneath. Make sure you cut at your guide underneath, not past it and not above it. And you always want to leave a little bit of extra length behind the ear, because that's where the hair shrinks. And every section I cut, I check for balance. And then just keep working up the head, using your comb still. Now you're going to start with the fine tooth part of your comb, and then you're going to switch as soon as the hair gets too thick to the wide tooth part of your comb. Now when you make your next section, you're going to move from the back all the way to the front above the ear, so that way your line can be symmetrical from front to back. And you'll do one side first. We are still using our comb all the way through the front, and we are bringing our comb slightly back to leave some length in the front. So whatever you want your angle to be, that's the angle your comb is going to be at. This will ensure that you don't make a hole. Now you're going to move to the other side and cut your first section on the other side. Again, bringing a section all the way from the back to the front. Make sure your sections are nice and clean and neat. Now when you're doing a square line on the bottom, you're going to stand square to the back, and then you'll stand square to the side. Which is why I'm moving the doll head now. So now I'm square to the side. Make sure your angle is the same on that side that it was on the other side. And then you're going to stand in front of her, and you're going to check your balance on both sides. And I was longer on the left side, so I have to go back and fix that. Still cutting a little bit more because it was still longer. Now you can work all the way through one side, all the way to the top. I do switch to my fingers when I get to the top, but just make sure that your tension is not too much, especially when you're over the ears, because that's where the hair will bounce up and you can make a hole. And then you can work through to the other side. there is your bob. Now we're going to section the front from the back separately. So divide at the very top of the hair. Make sure we don't make a hole right there. And go straight from the top of the crown to the back of the ear. Just clip that away on both sides. Now we're going to section down the middle of the back, and you're going to start up higher because we need to leave some thickness at the bottom so we don't create a concave shape. We need enough of the bottom to support the graduation. So we're going to take a section down the middle of the back, vertical, pull it out at a 45 and take the top corner off, leaving the bottom. And then you're going to take slightly diagonal sections over direct to your previous, and you will have less hair as you work towards the outside corner. Then you're going to move on to the other side. Your hand position will change. Now you will be holding it from the top instead of underneath. Make sure you have the same angle with your fingers. And then take diagonal sections over directing to your previous. Making sure you don't take that outside corner off. You're pulling everything down to a 45. And then again, check for balance. Now we're going to take our next section, and it will be about 1 inch thick. It's what your fingers can hold on to. In a vertical, take another vertical section down the middle of the back, pull it down to your guide will be underneath that. Make sure you keep your same 45-degree angle on your fingers. Take a diagonal section over directed to your previous. And keep moving through the side that way. Over direct to your previous. Make sure your fingers are in the same place. And you're pulling the hair slightly down. And then when you get to that outside corner, just make sure you're not cutting off your length. Now you're going to cross check. Take a small section on the top, and you should see a shorter to longer angle, and you can take a tiny bit off if you need to, but if you see a longer piece, you have to go back and take another vertical section to correct. Now moving to the other side, remember on the right side your fingers are going to be over the top instead of underneath. Making sure you're pulling down to the same 45-degree angle. And the underneath is your guide, or the previous is your guide. You should have two guides to help you. And then you can cross check. Make sure you pull it down to a 45. Don't hold it up higher or it's not going to look right. And then check for balance again. Make sure you didn't cut off your line. And then just move through the top, doing the same thing. And make sure as you move up the head that you're still pulling down to a 45-degree angle. Slightly diagonal sections over directed to your previous. And when you get to that spot on the head, you want to make sure you don't cut your length. So make sure you know where your length is. So visually see it before you cut. That's where the hole happens. And then you can cross-check again just to make sure. And then move through the other side. Again, on this side, make sure you know where your length is. Over direct it enough so that you're not cutting it off. And we're cross-checking again. Checking my length, make sure I didn't cut it off. Hey, Michael. Alright, so we have 2 more sections. Just make sure you don't take too big of a section that your fingers can't hold onto it. A lot of people do that at the end and then they end up with a weight line that they didn't want. Hey, Delilah. So continue, you're doing the exact same thing, pulling it down slightly to a 45. And as you move up to the top, you don't have to hold it down so far. And we're taking a little bit more vertical sections now as opposed to diagonal. If you pull it down too far, it will be too heavy on the top. Over directing everything to your previous. Now we're doing square on that last section to make sure that it's a little bit softer on top of your graduation. It'll still look graduated, it just won't be heavy on the top. This is especially important if you're dealing with somebody with thick hair. The finer the hair is, the less square you have to do it. So now you can change your finger position on this side so that you can see. And there we have our graduation in the back. Now we're going to move through to the sides. And to graduate the sides, we're actually not going to graduate, we're going to do square layers, which will look like graduation on the sides because we don't have all the hair on the bottom over the ear. So you're going to over direct it back, find your guide in the back and connect. Now you can see I'm holding it up higher, so you're going to hold it straight out from your section. And your fingers are at a 90-degree angle. And you're still over directing everything to your previous. And as you move towards the front of the head, you will have less hair to cut. And then you can cross-check. Make sure when you're cross-checking that you're always holding it where you cut it. And then do the same thing on the other side. As you move up the head, you're going to have more hair to cut. But you can see I took about a 2-inch section to start with because we need some of that hair at the bottom to fall out so that we don't cut into our line. And make sure you over direct. Again, we're doing square, pulling it straight out from the head, fingers are at a 90. You can see you have less to cut as you move to the front. So take another 1-inch section and you're going to do the same thing. Your guide will be on the bottom, so work up from the bottom. So be careful at the point of recession in the front that you're over directing it enough that you don't make a hole, because the hair will follow the hairline if you don't over direct it. That means when you comb it down, it will have the same shape as the hairline. So I always prefer to stand behind the client whenever possible. Also, when you're over directing, I prefer to pull the hair back towards me as opposed to away from me. So we're still cutting at a 90 straight out from the head. You want to make sure your sections are not too thick so that you can see your guide. That way you don't get lost. This last section, we shouldn't be taking really anything off so we can pick up the whole thing. And you can cross-check, taking a thin section across the top. Remember, you need to hold it where you cut it. You can't hold it straight up because it won't look right. And it should be angled shorter to longer from the back. So there is the finished graduated bob. Now we're going to blow dry and style, and then we'll do our finishing work. And the finishing work is what makes it the expensive looking haircut. So you will always have to go back in and fine tune when it's dry, whether you do that with texturizing scissors, whether you point cut. It's going to depend on the texture of hair. So I'm using my texturizing scissors and point cutting with them to take weight off of the very top so that the ends lay a little flatter. And you want to do this when it's dry because that's when you can see it. So you want to make sure you do a really good blow dry. I also like to comb everything all the way back so there's no long pieces. But basically this is just a visual fine tuning, so it's whatever you see. And when you pull it up like that, you can see where the hair is thicker. You can also point cut with your scissors. The difference would be the scissors are going to take out maybe a little bit more depending on the angle of your point cutting. Texturizing scissors can take out a little bit less. Just make sure you go in a little more vertical to the hair so that you don't disrupt your line. And also don't go into the point of recession because the hair is already weaker there. And you can texturize until it visually looks the way you want it to look. However flat you want those ends to be. And this is where we're pulling everything back to make sure we don't have any long pieces hanging over, just in case their hair blows in the wind or parts in a different place. And you could just point cut into that. Do not cut horizontally because we want it to be softer. And also make sure you hold it up high enough. And then if you need to perfect your line on the bottom, this is when you can do that also. Again, you do have to make sure you do a very precise blow dry so you can really see it. And I always use my comb when I'm doing this too. And you want to use the wide tooth part of your comb so you're not causing too much tension on the hair. Finished graduated bob.